Welcome to the Confidence Fence podcast. I'm your host, Connor, and today we've got a real special treat. We have our co-host, James Chiappetta, joining us as well, and a guest I have been so excited to have on the podcast for these coming weeks that I can't believe it is actually here. It's a bit of a Christmas gift for me. So Carolyn Wong from COBALT is joining us. Carolyn is the Chief Strategy Officer at COBALT, a pen testing as a service company. She oversees security, people, and community, and has been in the InfoSec career for over 15 years, where she's led security teams in eBay and Zynga. Carolyn also hosts her own podcast, The Humans of InfoSec, teaches cybersecurity courses on LinkedIn, is the author of a popular textbook, Security Metrics That Matter, a book I have on my very desk here. And at some point in her schedule, she found time to talk with us. So Carolyn, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to speak with both of you this afternoon.
Well, I think it is appropriate to say, as someone who has such a well-accomplished career that you have and all this incredible content you're putting out, there's got to be a story behind this. Like, what brought you to be where you are today on the forefront of an incredible security startup company? I don't think startup's an appropriate term, just an incredible startup company. And you're putting out content on LinkedIn, helping people get up to speed on AppSec. You're putting out great textbooks for people to understand metrics and how to communicate effectively with security. Walk me through that story. How did Carolyn end up in these shoes today?
Happy to do that. So it really starts with my father. I am the daughter of immigrants to the United States. My mother was born in Hong Kong. My father was born in the Fiji Islands. And when I was 16, my immigrant father said to me, "Caroline, what do you want to study in college?" I said, "I would really like to study dance because I love dance, or maybe psychology because I think it's really interesting." And he said to me, "You're going to study engineering and you're going to do it at the best school that you can get accepted to."
I love that choice. I love that choice. What do you want to do? It's engineering.
Why ask in the first place, right?
Exactly.
But this was my dad's way, and he did it with the best of intentions. He did it for my sister and for myself in a way where he really wanted us to have all the options that we possibly could at our disposal. And in our family, the folks who were successful in business, and they were successful in engineering. And so he naturally said, "You've got the capability to do this. This is the path for you." On a side note, my sister is a pediatrician, and I like to contrast our careers because hers is very, like, to be any sort of medical doctor, you have to really decide that that's what you want to do, and then you have to follow that path for several years. My path, as you're about to find out, was really quite random. And each step that I took along the way ended up actually being more because of a personal choice in most cases than a professional one. So let's see. I study electrical engineering and computer science at UC Berkeley. I decide I do not want to be an engineer. And I look for an internship my junior year, and I end up working for eBay. The reason I end up working for eBay is because I'm living in San Francisco at the time, and my boyfriend at the time, his parents are living in Silicon Valley. And so I think to myself, I'd rather live with this guy and his parents this summer than with my parents in San Francisco. And so I literally base my job search around that criteria. Now, I'm fortunate because if you go to a school like Berkeley and you have a degree like EECS and you live near Silicon Valley, there is opportunity. And that for me was very fortunate. And that's exactly what my father intended to set me up for. So I do this internship in IT project management, which happens to suit me. I graduate and I say to my intern manager, "I'm graduating. I would love to work for you full time. Do you have a job for me?" And he says, "Actually, no, because IT has a hiring freeze right now, but there's an entry-level position on the information security team that you should go and check out." And I said, "Okay, I don't know much about information security." And I literally read the page on Wikipedia on information security. I end up getting that job, and here I am 15 years later, still in the field.
So you've literally gone from reading the Wikipedia page to being on the Wikipedia page. That's a pretty incredible journey, I would say.
It's cool. It's been really fun, and I credit it to a number of things. One, simply that I didn't realize this when I was getting into it. When I was getting into it, it was the year 2005, and PCI DSS, the first version, had just come out in 2004. Right. eBay, as a public company, needed to make sure that all of its SOX IT audit controls were going properly. And so there was a big business reason to bring in someone like myself at that point in time. I didn't realize the bigger picture until later, which is that we only need security when there's stuff that we care about that we value enough to protect. And the stuff that we care about and that we want to protect is moving from the physical world to the digital world. And so as that continues to increase, I naturally expect that the need for cybersecurity is going to increase. I've observed that in many different ways throughout my career. And so when I have little kids, and they're 2 and 5, and when they grow up, and we're even starting to have these conversations a bit with my 5-year-old, and we talk about, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm not going to turn to my daughter and say, you must be an engineer and you must go to the best program that you get accepted to, but I'm going to say to her, look, it's important to do something that's interesting to you. It's important to do something where you can have a lot of impact and contribute a lot and add a lot of value. And a lot of that has to do with the market, frankly, and not with you. And it's really useful to have skills that are in high demand. And so I sort of randomly found myself in this place. And then what I have loved along the way is the really interesting problem solving that comes along with this field, and having the opportunity to meet some really interesting, really brilliant people along the way.
Totally. I mean, our field is full of interesting people.
Yeah.
Both definitions of that term. But so that's a pretty incredible career that you've gone through, from going from electrical engineering to IT to InfoSec, and then kind of been in this space here. And now I would say even more focused into AppSec, if that's fair.
Yeah, that is fair. Yeah. That is fair. I started out on the GRC side. So my first role was policy and compliance. One of the things I did at eBay was set up sort of the executive council that would be approving information security policy. I was responsible for managing all of the policy exceptions. I also built the metrics program there. When I got to Zynga, I was writing the information security policy to get Zynga ready to go public. And then I sort of ended up working for Symantec on what was being rebranded as a GRC tool. This was Symantec Control Compliance Suite. And that was sort of my GRC time. It wasn't until I went to Cigital after Symantec when I kind of took what I knew about metrics and data, and the fact that I had worked at 2 cloud companies, both of which application security was extremely important. I began to get deeper into AppSec, which I have been focused on for the past 7 or so years.
That's a really interesting progression, right? Like one of the questions that I had for you was, operationally, what was it like 15 years ago versus now, right? Like, and it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you got your start in GRC doing policy and compliance work, manual, tedious work at times, and then progressed into application security, right? Where you could take all of that knowledge and expertise and potentially build that in, right, from the get-go, getting that into people's brains, right, shifting left, right? Is that been the experience?
Yeah, it has been so many things. When I arrived at eBay, they handed me a 50-page policy document and they said, here are the information security policies. You are in charge of updating them. And you're also in charge of responding to requests that come from the business or from the technology teams about why the policy is what it is and what they need to do if they want an exception to the policy, which for like a new college grad is a little bit intimidating.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the way that I did it really was I had excellent management, and I would meet with a business person or a tech person who would say things like, why do we need to separate development from production? You know, and I didn't necessarily know right away, but I went to my manager and I said, why do we need to separate development and production? And then I ended up kind of being this, this communication liaison, if you will. The conversation ended up being about having a fundamental philosophical set of rules that made sense for that company's security posture, and then being able to work with people and try to understand, well, what are they trying to accomplish? And that gave me a very, I would say, real and upfront view of our policies and procedures. You know, it wasn't uncommon for someone to say to me, well, I don't want to comply with this PCI thing because that's inconvenient for one reason or another. Like, really, how bad is this fine going to be? You know, and really, you know, and so that to me was like kind of an upfront and center look at, well, how would a business make these decisions, you know, and how should we make these decisions? And that was one of the things that kind of taught me, like, my security philosophy is not about 100% security. There's this saying that says, you know, the safest boat is the one that never leaves the harbor or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
But that's not like what boats are supposed to do. And similarly, you know, one of the things that I've been always thinking about throughout my career is, what's the right level of security and how do you get to that? And that answering that question really, I think, is very much more of an art than a science. I think that as an industry, we have best practices, we have shoulds. We also have some kind of observable data sets. BSIMM is one of them, where we can look out at each other and say, well, what are people actually doing? And what results are they getting? And so to me, it's this really fascinating coming together of like art and data and science that drives decision-making, not only for a security leader, but for all of the different stakeholders that that security leader interacts with. Because of course, it's not just the security team. It's not just a security leader that makes security happen for an organization. It's the whole company. Mm-hmm. And so there is this actually human psychology aspect to me that's really fascinating.
So I couldn't agree with you more on everything you said, but there was so much to unpack there. So I think we could spend most of the episodes unpacking those few paragraphs, right? Because what I look at where you're just talking about now is saying, you know, it's not about secure all of the things. It's about secure the right things. Right. And even in the right way. And in the right way. And even what we mean by secure, right? The word is, unfortunately, the English language fails us here, because secure is a static moment in time. Where are you now? Versus we should be talking about like resilience, but we can't say make all the things resilient. It doesn't quite have the same connotation with it. But I think, so that understanding that it has to be, whatever we're trying to do from a security perspective has to be tied to the mission of the company in an enablement sort of way that helps people get where they want to go more safely. I mean, not for naught, but like that kind of maybe a common thought now, but that was a very uncommon thought in 2005, 2006, that you would say, let me prioritize my risk rating here such that you can, you know, get where you need to go faster. Like, I don't know, you know, and that's kind of what it sounds like that you were, as you were in your GRC, I could see like seeing where you are now and the work you're publishing now, and you're tying us back to the work you're doing in the GRC. I can kind of see that thread as it's matured over time. That looks
it's been fascinating. I think one of the things that has really changed is that I almost feel like 15 years ago, some security people thought we can prevent attacks. We can avoid incidents. And that, I think, today, we all just can look at each other in the eye and say, no, we can't. We can't prevent attacks. Attacks are going to happen. They're probably happening right now. Our job is not to prevent attacks from happening. Our job is to deal with them when they happen. Our job is to detect them first. Our job is to detect them internally before we're told about them externally. So that's definitely a change in mindset that I've observed.
Yeah, I was just on a conversation with one of our other podcasts. One of our guests came on, Robert Vale, Bob, and we were talking about this idea of the difference between an incident and a breach. And as a security community, we need to be focused on preventing the breach, not preventing the attack. Like, incidents are going to happen, right? How well you respond to it, that's your level of professionalism, right? That's how well your program is how well your staff is responding. But the focus should be on preventing the breach. What's important? How do we make sure we keep a hold of that? And then, of course, even in those cases, you can't necessarily get 100% there. So how do you handle that when it does inevitably happen?
Right.
But,
because there's always going to be discrete, limited resources on the defense side. We're never going to be able to apply infinite resources to securing any asset. And the other thing that I think is really interesting here is, and I'm kind of losing it, so maybe it was in my head. Oh, it was kind of a good point I wanted to make.
well, I like the fact you said, it's okay, Connor, you have a limited budget, a limited team. I think the understanding that we have a discrete sense of defense against what is almost an infinite adversary. Because when one adversary is exhausting, the next one just picks up where it left off. So you're dealing with, it very much is an asynchronous warfare here. Sorry to use warfare, but like it is an asynchronous attack versus defense situation. We have infinite against finite, and eventually infinite wins.
I think there's some truth to that. I also have remembered what I wanted to say, which is that the internet is inherently not secure. And that's what a lot of us are dealing with, right? So, in the 60s and in the 70s, these were like government research projects. These were like scientists from 4 or 5 universities trying to work together to do things like share data so they could study the atmosphere. These were not the use cases that we use today, where we have strangers, transacting online with strangers. And so I think that it is this really interesting combination of, you can't stop the attacks. What you can do is control how you respond to them and how you detect them. And at the same time, the medium that we're working with, software, and particularly the internet, these things are not inherently secure, because when they were developed, that wasn't a requirement.
Yeah, it wasn't a paradigm that they were working with, right? It wasn't one of the pillars you have to go with.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to ask, would you say that as time progresses, that the riskiness, or I guess the overall level of security in the, like, just the World Wide Web, right? Like across the world, is increase or decreasing, right? Like, is there a way to quantify how secure putting something out there is? Like, I release a new thing. If I did it last year, I would have, it would have been this risky, but I'm releasing it this year, and the overall level of risk is this.
So we do have data to answer that question. Software comes out, it is vulnerable, it gets updated, it gets patched, and so today we do have choices in terms of the technology that we choose to use. We have choices in terms of how to configure that technology. Secure configurations exist. One of the things, it's not a perfect analogy, but I'm just thinking about like the evolution of Wi-Fi, for example. Now this year, more people perhaps are working from home than before. And that means that each of us are our IT department. We're responsible for setting up our home internet, and therefore the internet that we use when we do our work. And so, WEP, was proven to be vulnerable like 19 years ago.
Yeah.
WPA, same story. WPA2, better. And so, you know, on one hand, as we go into the future, updates happen, more secure by default options are available. However, we are in a situation where all of those legacy systems continue to exist. And there are people who intentionally, or more probably unintentionally, choose to use WEP because they don't know. Choose not to configure the settings on their cloud configurations securely because they may not know how, and or they may not believe it's important. So really interesting, because we've got tools to secure stuff. All the vulnerabilities are still there and will still be open and available for exploitation if we do not address the known vulnerabilities with the controls at our fingertips.
Yeah. I have an interesting insight that I just got from what you just said, right? This, you know, secure by default, like changing the way we get something, right, and then use it. It's almost like at the scale we're talking about, right? You know, if we think about countries that do organ donation, right, like opting in or opting out, like organ donation levels in the US are very low. I think it's like 20% or less. Where in Europe, like Spain, it's like 80%, right? Where it's opt out rather than opt in. In making changes like that, where when you set your home router up, you have to opt out of security, like a secure default.
Yeah. I think that's a really great analogy. And I think what's going to happen is like there's two forces at play here. Actually, it's a ton, but I can only handle two at a time. So you've got systems that are maturing over time, so the risk is coming down, and that risk, that bending of the elbow down, will be accelerated if the manufacturers are moving into this default secure position, where your default configuration, and it's coming down. So then we have, like, as you're mentioning as an example, we have these protocols like WPA2. If you have that turned on by default, and that's kind of easy, so like your grandma can set it up, great, that's going to really bend that arc. But at the exact same time, we're releasing brand new services and brand new technology and brand new things, and they haven't had that maturity curve. So therefore, their risk is going up right now because we're realizing what badness can happen. And then, of course, the third thing that's always at play here is that we have a Rubik's Cube we're trying to solve that's fighting back. So we are dealing with an adversary on the other side of the table who is thinking creatively, okay, we're in that space with my attack window. Like, how can I get my advantage in there? So.
Yep. I love it. And I would really like for us to create a visual that we can share, maybe, that's coming out of this conversation. Connor, one thing that I'd actually like to add to your model that you're kind of drawing for us right now is that when the new stuff comes out, it's new kind of for everyone. It's new for people who intend to use it as it was designed. And it's also new for people who want to attack it. And so I would say that even though it's not necessarily mature, it's still new to the people who want to attack it, and they haven't yet discovered the attacks yet. Whereas for the older stuff, even though there are more secure options, a lot more of the attacks are known. So I think this is, I'm really having fun talking.
I like this idea. I think we can play with it. I think you're right. I think it's the first podcast we ever done where I've gotten a homework assignment out of it. So I'll take this away and I'll think about it. Because I think you're absolutely right. It's like as the security of the options become more mature, so do the attack patterns. So there's got to be a great mathematical formula in here, because out of this comes really the rate. It's like a differential of where we are between like the ability to secure it and the ability for the adversary to get well known with it. Thus, it also, as it gets well known, the attacker class comes down from like persistent adversaries to script kiddies. So your attack base is wiping up. I think it's a whole other podcast episode in just unpacking and developing that theory there.
Oh, this will be fun. This will be fun. And then you add on the fact that, you know, any software program, any application, any mobile app has so many different components, some of which are third party, some of which are open source. And I don't know that we as an industry have been able to solve one of the super fundamental things, which is simply an asset inventory. Like, do you know what services and products you're using? Is there an up-to-date list somewhere? Maybe, maybe not. And it just gets harder, as an organization grows in maturity and in complexity, and frankly, in its success.
That simple thing like an SBOM, that software bill of materials, right, for your app or whatever. Like there's literally, I was speaking with a VC the other week, and they're investing in a company whose sole product right now is to engage in these applications and be able to give you a real-time SBOM that stays up to date as you go over time. Like that is such a fundamental problem that someone has said, I'm dedicating my time to building a company to solve this problem set, because when you know what you have, you can begin to fix it. I totally agree with that. Which also reminds me of a metric or two I may have seen in a book that I was reading. So I'm going to try and segue that one as forced segue as possible to this book that you have. Like, you published this book a while ago, and in preparation for our conversations, I started reading it. I really loved what it was. It's been published for a while. It's out there for a while. So they may not have all of the cloud metrics around it, but it has a lot of incredible metrics in there. So, I do want to talk about that for a second. Like, why a book on metrics? Why a book on security metrics? What was the passion? What was the draw behind that?
Sure. So thank you so much for asking. When I joined the eBay information security team, a couple years later in 2007, eBay hired Dave Cullinane as the Chief Information Security Officer. And Dave came over to eBay from Washington Mutual. Dave taught me so much. I was sort of reporting to a manager who was reporting to him at the time. And the only reason I was included in the management team meetings was because I type really fast. And I was in this like project management role where I was helping folks to organize and document things. And one day, Dave approaches me in the break room and he says, hey, what would you like to do when you grow up? And this is like me at 23, right? And I say to him, I'd like to be the CEO of a small to medium-sized company. And he says to me at the time, he says, well, for now, I'd really like for you to report directly to me and be the chief of staff to the team. And I say to him, Dave, I'm like only 23 and I'm just getting started. And he says, yeah, I know that. He's like, don't worry. I know everything that we need to know. And I know that what you can do is you can get stuff done. And and that was really like that was like my big break, And so Dave goes to eBay's executives at the time and he says, look, we are severely underinvested in information security. I really need you to give me a lot more money. And they gave it to him. Side note, the way he got them to give it to him is he called up his friends who were also CISOs and he said, well, how much are they giving you?
Yes.
So it was data driven. He prepared this slide that he provided to the executive committee, and it had names of organizations and how much their annual information security spend was. And they gave him a bunch of money. And we were given the go ahead to grow the team by nearly 3x. And so I was in charge of managing this budget and kind of overseeing the organizational design and structure of the team and launching these projects and engaging with these third-party vendors. And about 6 months after we get the money, Dave says to me, okay, we've got the money, we've hired some people, we've bought some technology, we've got these projects launched. Now what we need to do is we need to show the value of the security investment. And we need to make sure that this is an ongoing thing. We need to convince everyone that, yeah, it was really great that they gave us a bunch of money once, but they need to give us a bunch of money every year. And so he said, Caroline, go and figure out how to do security metrics. And so I did what I always do when I don't know what to do, which is I did some Google searching and I read as many books as I could, and I attended as many security conferences that I could, and I talked to everyone that I could who would talk to me about security metrics, and we just sort of figured it out. In 2009, I think it was, Dave had a talk. He was presenting on a panel at RSA Security Conference, and he had an extremely busy schedule. He said, you know what, Caroline, I don't really have time to do this panel. Why don't you do it instead? After all, you're the one who's running the metrics program. And this for me was like a very, very, very cool opportunity. So I'm super excited, take the opportunity. After that talk, I'm approached by a woman who's an editor at McGraw-Hill. And she says, Caroline, I'm working with this really brilliant person, Lance Hayden, who's writing a book on IT security metrics. Would you consider contributing a chapter, like a case study to this book? And I say, yeah, that would be super cool. So I do that and I read Lance's book. I also do a technical review for him. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, this is brilliant stuff. And I know that no one's ready for it yet. I know that practically speaking, the industry is not ready for it. This book is 10 years ahead of its time. And so I email the editor and I say, Jane, Lance's book is really good. It's brilliant. I think it's 10 years ahead of its time. I'll tell you what the industry needs right now is a beginner's guide to security metrics, and I can write that book for you. And she said, yeah, let's do it. And so, 2 years of afternoons and evenings and weekends later, it came to be. And I dedicated the book to Dave Cullinane because he really put me in that position where I was able to have those experiences and learn from what was going on.
I mean, that makes so much sense. Because the first thing I flip through, I'm like, I always read the bit of the book that no one else reads is like the preface and the foreword and all that stuff that you should. And I'm like, listen, it's the reason it's here, right? And I saw that and I was like, huh, okay. And I'm so glad you highlighted it because I obviously had no idea the story behind it. But it's so cool that you've had such who is really a giant in the industry be able to take a moment, not a moment, but like years and say, here, let me just give you a space for you to succeed on your own merit and have that space and that opportunity. I think all of us as security leaders could take a note of that. Like if we have someone on our team who's got that spark in their eye, that whatever, really just kind of step aside and give them some space and let them run with it.
Yep.
But yeah, so I think even now it's still as applicable now as it ever has been, because right now we still deal with, oh, your risk is high, your risk is low. I'm like, what does that mean? On a scale, you go to the board of directors, you're like, oh, you're in the 5 category. They're like, do I mean be really, really scared or just really scared or kind of scared? It's such a, we're still as as a security community are pretty bad at communicating data-driven decision points. I think it's still very anecdotal. I think we have enough scary stories that it works for a while, but at some point we need to come forward with the data and highlight that.
Yeah.
So to that note, you also highlighted earlier that you started working with the BSIMM framework as an observable model. I mean, we could unpack that for a little bit. I mean, talk about like data-driven decisions there.
I would love to. I am a huge fan of the BSIMM. BSIMM was started by some brilliant folks, including Sammy Miguez and Gary McGraw. I think today, I think we're on BSIMM 11. In my time at Cigital, I led about 36 or so BSIMM assessments, which was so much fun. I got to fly around the world and meet with people and talk to them about software security. And the thing about BSIMM is it is this 110 or so application security activities that have actually been observed at companies. Today, I think the data pool consists of something like 130 companies. And so, there's a big difference between someone who is smart and experienced saying, you should do A, you should do B, you should do C, and actually going almost like a scientist and looking and observing and saying, okay, what are you actually doing? Like what is actually such a good idea that it made it past the whiteboard and it actually got onto someone's to-do list, someone's performance evaluation. Someone may have been hired to do this job. And so that, I think, is the power of the BSIMM. And I think that one common data point that a lot of security leaders look for when they're trying to support decision-making around security is, what's everyone else doing? And the BSIMM provides that in its own way.
So
And I think
do me a
that's cool.
favor. Break
Yeah.
it down for the audience. Like, tell me, like, let's get into the weeds a little bit. Like, so what is this mystical, magical tool that's going to help us with our AppSec program? And is it just limited to software security? Yeah.
This is fun. Everyone, I highly recommend that you go to www.bsimm.com. The model is online. It is free and available to everyone. You can download the full report. There's a new report that comes out every year. And basically what it is, okay, there are these 4 domains and there are these 12 practices and there are about 110 security activities. And it tells you out of that data set of about 130, at how many out of that 130 was this particular activity observed. So you can basically see what are people really doing and what are people not doing so much. At the time when I was there, you would see that pretty much everyone was doing some kind of pen testing and some kind of security awareness. Beyond that, and getting into a lot of the other more mature activities, there was a huge amount of variability, which I think makes sense.
Got it. Okay, so this is a framework for like, where should I start? Where should I invest? Biggest bang for my buck, that type of thing.
Yeah, and if you want, I think you can pay Synopsys tens of thousands of dollars to have someone who's in a role like the one that I was in, and a couple other people, come and do an assessment for you and have your data officially included in the data pool. And you can go to the BSIMM conferences, which are super fun, but you can also just use it yourself and kind of do a self-assessment. It really depends on what you need. And I think that another thing I've observed throughout my career is that sometimes for a security leader to say, I think this is the right way to go, that actually can come across differently to an external stakeholder, like an executive. If, you can say, well, this third party that's really legit came and said this thing, so some of that is understanding how do decisions get made effectively in your organization and what's going to work. Is your organization going to appreciate that you took this kind of like, hands-on, for free, like gritty method, or are they going to prefer that someone gives you a fancy report for a bunch of money and decide that that makes it worth it?
So as I can attest to the utility of the framework, I used it back in 2017 when I was at FactSet, and it was a really, really useful exercise, right? Like I remember it taking a little bit of time to get through, like thinking about what we were doing, but ultimately it drove a few things, right? How do we compare to those in the space, right? That was a clear and obvious win, right? What are people doing that, because like if you think about it, there's no, like you were saying in the beginning of this conversation, right? There is no perfect security, right? It doesn't exist. There's the things that we know that everybody should do, and then there's the things that we should always avoid, right? And then there's this like really big middle ground. And I think what this really does is tell you like, here are the things you should really be doing, and here's like a space for you to play in, right? And this is what it means in terms of a maturity curve to add these 10 things to the group of 12, right? That you should always be doing. And it was really valuable, right? Like not just to get validation that we're doing the right things, but also validation to align what our strategic priorities were against a framework, right? Yeah. Like, how are we actually advancing? Is this how other people advance? So there was a ton of utility. I would strongly encourage folks to take a look at it. It was a really positive experience.
I think I'm just gonna harp on this for one moment, and then we'll move on to another topic. But like this idea of finding a framework, like the amount of security professionals I talk to, and my one thing I plead with them is don't reinvent the wheel. Like we have had decades now. I think we can confidently say we've had cybersecurity existed for 2 decades. We have plural decades that you can just use those who have gone before you and the work they've done. If you're taking over a company for the security program for the first time, I have no idea where to start, and you need a big program, cool, SANS 20, start there. If you're looking for your application security and you're going to move that forward, you got BSIMM. If you understand how well can you detect an attacker in an environment, you got the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Do we have everything that we need to observe an attacker? Shield from MITRE. It's like pick a framework that's right for that discipline and then stick to it. There'll always be edge cases. There'll always be bits in the model that don't fit. But if you can get that 90-10 principle, you get 90% coverage, and you have to like just use 90% science and framework and then 10% art and kind of making it up. That's great, because right now I see so many people and they've reversed it, and they think for them to be seen as valuable, they have to make it up again and reinvent it. So don't do that to my listening audience. Okay, I'm done. I'm off my soapbox, but I think I just want to highlight that.
I agree. I agree so strongly, and to add to that, I just want to say that another thing that I've gotten deeper into recently-ish is OWASP Top 10. So the most recent version of OWASP Top 10 as of this recording is the second version that was released in 2017. I think there's a plan to release another one next year. The first one was released in 2003. And if I compare side by side the 2003 version with the second 2017 version, they're not dramatically different. So what that says to me is actually what you're saying, Connor, which is that there's a lot that we already know and that we have known for a long time. And what the OWASP Top 10 thing says to me specifically is that there are some technical problems for which we have solutions. We actually know how to identify these things. We know how to fix them. We know how to prevent them. Why aren't they going away? I actually think it's because of the complexity of the people and the process involved.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that. I think it's, as I say, reading is hard, security is hard. Like, yeah, it's hard work, and it is hard. Making sure the CORS headers are right, and you've got the right CRFs in place, like all that. It takes time and energy, and it doesn't materially show up day one as a new feature, and so it often gets overlooked until someone comes in and does a pen test, or the adversary does one for you, and they don't tell you about it. That's my idea of a bad joke. So let's talk about AppSec culture. I know both of you are really focused on this, and this is a place where I really want to just turn the mic over to Caroline and be like, I've really spent my career on the blue team side, and I've really focused on incident response, detection response. Like, that's my jam. Like, I can do that all day long, and I'm really happy in that space. Then now I'm running programs, and I'm like, oh, great, we have all this code, and all our business value is realized in the software that we ship. Like, without our software, there is no company. So let's go protect that software. And then we don't see it at the companies I'm at right now, but what we have seen at other companies, of course, is this huge clash between engineering and AppSec. Engineering doesn't want to listen to AppSec. AppSec doesn't feel heard. Everybody's hurt. No one's securing anything. OWASP Top 10 stays the same. So what do we do? Like, what are your thoughts on kind of bridging this divide and fixing this problem?
So there are so many things that I want to share. And the first thing that I want to say before I address your specific question is there is this concept of brilliant jerks. I think there's like a Google book, and I think there's like a chapter on brilliant jerks. And I just want to say that I personally believe that for every brilliant jerk on this planet, there is a brilliant good person. And it is to an organization's advantage to go and find the brilliant good person and then hire that person. I actually don't think that we, as an industry, should be in a position where we need to accommodate for brilliant jerks. That's not something that I subscribe to. I don't think that benefits a company. I don't think that leads to long-term performance and success. Getting a little bit deeper into engineers and AppSec specifically, I do think that for some AppSec folks, myself included, I have found that later in my career, I spend more time trying to figure out how the application works, and specifically how the application creates value, how the application makes money. Because if I can understand that, then I can design my security program to protecting that accurately. I think that what I've seen that doesn't work is when AppSec folks look at one of the should frameworks, one of the prescriptive ones, and they go in and they say, well, we should do A and B and C because this thing says so. And the engineers look at the person and say, you you clearly don't understand, good for you, AppSec person, for having your framework and for being able to parrot it. That's really different from understanding what this unique organization does and how we do it, and giving us sort of more useful, tailored, relevant advice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that sentence. But James, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in general, right, like the optimism side of things, like being an optimist, right, and finding the good when you're trying to find the bad, right? Like that's often what people in security are doing, right? They're trying to find issues and get those things fixed, and that could be, it could be toxic sometimes. So getting people to think positively about what we're doing and creating a sense of optimism about what we're doing, I think is important. So, I just to reinforce what you're saying.
I love that phrase. Find the good when your job is to find the bad, right? And we're finding the bad in this, we're finding the bad and the weakness in the software, and we're finding the good in the people. And I think that just perfectly encapsulates this sense of like, we can find forward. If we start with what you're saying, Carolyn, which is like, understand your app, understand how it makes money. What's its value to the organization, and then support it from there. And I think part of this has to do with something that James and I have talked about quite a bit, and I think it's becoming more recognized as a pattern. Just want to get your thoughts. It's this idea of like putting up guardrails, right? Freedom within limits. And you're saying, great, here's your pipeline. Here's how you go from design to release. And then we're going to put in checks and balances along the way, and help people. And one thing I like about this kind of more modern approach is security gets out of the way, right? If we see security as like the gatekeeper, was like nothing gets released until like security says so, that's a problem. Like you're setting yourself up for failure, you're setting yourself up for a bad cultural conflict. But if we can say, security is here to enable you and support you as you go through this journey. And by the way, all the data we see, we're also going to surface to you as you're going through your pipeline here. I think that will also help with this cultural guide. But I mean, you're way closer to this than I am. So what are some of the things that you think that as people who are running AppSec programs today should be implementing to help make this a better integration with their engineering teams?
So I want to riff on something that James said, which is finding the good. And I want to say, find the common ground, get folks on the same page. Because often we're not, right? Often AppSec and engineering have different agendas, different objectives, and that's okay. But if we can carve out a slice of, yeah, we both think that this thing is a good idea, then we can go for it together. The example that I gave earlier in the podcast about, someone questioning, well, what if we don't comply with PCI? Do they really fine people? And how much is that fine? Because if it's going to be less than it's going to cost me to implement this change, then maybe it's worth it. That to me is an example of misalignment. Like if, for example, everyone in the organization is like on board truly with, yeah, we need to comply with whether it's regulatory requirement, contractual obligation, industry standard, that can be something. There's a couple that I want to share with you both, which are not like that. They're not like, okay, follow these rules. Yeah, we all agree we should follow these rules. But there are some things that I think a lot of AppSec folks actually can get engineers to agree to. So one of those is, hey, can we agree that it's a good idea to try and prevent the same application security defects from happening over and over again? Mm-hmm. I think everyone's for that, right? So, and then another one is, hey, can we agree that we want to reduce the probability that attackers can cause our critical applications to stop functioning? Yeah. And the third, I think, that I think a lot of AppSec folks can use with engineering is, hey, can we agree that we're going to require fixes for bugs for which well-known attacks exist? And for each of these three statements that I've just shared, which I call risk management objectives, these, you can actually, when you get folks to agree to one of these things, you can actually put a plan together, and then you can say, okay, if you agree that we're going to do this, here's the plan, let's do the plan. But I think folks often don't establish what the common ground and the common objective is, and then it's natural that folks are simply going to butt heads because each person is looking out for the interest of their team, looking out for how do I accomplish my objective.
Those are three great questions, level six. I think everyone in the room would be like, yeah, I don't want to do the same work over and over again. I don't want to have, my service, come back over and over again. I have to go patch day in and day out. Wouldn't it be nice if only I'd caught this in the development? It wouldn't it be nice if you integrated all the way to the IDE and then just told me like, actually that syntax looks a little funny. Pay a little closer attention to this function. Pay a little closer attention to this part of the code base. Yeah, I'm definitely going to take note of that because I have a few conversations to have with people in the coming weeks. I'm like, yeah, that's a good place to start with common ground. Even when you have like the most engaging engineer and AppSec team and everyone like kumbaya moment, it is still important to start with a common ground because then you have a common language.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is get on the same level, like get the buy-in, right, and help them achieve like a common perspective of what security means from the get-go, right? What basic things you need to think about when you're going to go build something new or change something, right? And you can't shift any further left, right? Once you're in the mind of the developer, right? Where else can you go? I think that's a great point.
That's really good too. I feel like we could design a sticker around that. Like you can't shift further left than the developer's mind.
Yeah.
There's probably like a short, cool way to say it, but the concept I think is really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. I just wrote down the word sticker so I come back to that later. I've never gotten so much homework before. So let's ask another question here. Like at the intro, introduce you as the role that you play at COBALT. And it is a meaningful role. It is shaping pen testing. You guys are doing incredible work at COBALT. So I wanted to talk about a few items specifically and get your thoughts on this. Like you have you have a place and an observability into all these pen tests that are happening through your platform, right? And for those who don't know, COBALT is a platform which, someone who's running a security program can sign up, have a bunch of credits on the platform, say, oh, I need to pen test this, spend the amount of credits, and then get the team who's pen testing, and then off you go. And these are all vetted, background checked people, and they all come through the same IP, so you can whitelist into the WAF. I love it. I'm a fan. But the question is, to you, COBALT has data of like 2,500 pen tests or something like that. Not the content, but like the metrics around it. Like, what does that mean for COBALT? Like, what are you guys able to do, and how are you using this data to help the industry with that? It's kind of an open question. I think it's a fascinating data set that you have access to.
I am so excited about this data set. To me, it's one of the things that I'm most excited about at COBALT. So not only the fact that we can offer basically on-demand manual pen testing whenever an organization needs it, but the fact that for all of those pen tests, and that 2,500 number came from this summer, so now there's like a bunch more. But what we do is every year we publish a report. So, and these are like solid reports, these are like 30-page reports where we take insights from that data and we share it with the world. One of the things that we noticed last year in 2019, when we were looking at data from 1,400 or so pen tests, is that for the third year in a row, misconfiguration was the top vulnerability category. And we were also able to break that down into the subcategories: security headers, application settings, encryption settings, server configuration, mobile settings, cloud settings, improper security control. And so what we did was we said, hey, it is super cool that we're actually sitting in this position where we can say, look, across all of these different pen tests, misconfiguration is the top thing. And we took that as an opportunity to then educate the industry about, so what do you do about it? So we collected all of the best how to prevent security misconfiguration resources, and we put it all together in this report. It's free for anyone to download. in the most recent version of the report, which is State of Pen Testing 2020, which, side note, for the 4th year in a row, we again found that security misconfiguration was the most commonly identified vulnerability type. We decided to do a different type of research, and we decided to look at what are the types of vulnerabilities that humans are really good at finding, and what are the types of vulnerabilities that machines are really good at finding. And specifically, what we looked at was for web apps using DAST scanners. And it was super interesting. And as soon as I say it, you know, I think no one will be surprised, right? Humans can find business logic bypasses, race conditions, and chained exploits. Computers and machines simply can't find those classes of vulnerabilities. Now, machines can find lots and lots and lots of different kinds of vulnerabilities, but there are these specific classes that only humans can find. And we go into quite a lot of detail on that. So it's just thrilling to me to be kind of like a data person, to recognize the value of data and frankly, the lack of it in the security industry. BSIMM, I think, is actually a great example of amazing information sharing that's happening. I think, you know, what we're able to do with our pen test platform is gain insights in a way that no one has ever been able to do before, because even the most successful sort of traditional pen test consultancies, you know, these folks, they have pen test data, but it's in like, you know,
yeah, it's all in the Google Docs somewhere or a PDF form.
Yeah, they're like in encrypted PDF forms, and that's fine. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, you know, but it is thrilling to have this data and to be able to provide these insights to the industry.
And I think the ability to have this type of metrics, again, it goes back to, as a security leader, don't reinvent the wheel. And I think this is what's so innovative about what you guys are doing is you're like, let's take this and change action with. Like, that's not actually your business model. Like, your business model does not require you guys to turn around and share these insights. But it is a huge benefit to the rest of the industry to be like, okay, 2019 report tells me how to fix security configuration. 2020 tells me where I should put my people and where I should put my dollar technology. And yes, we will link to all of this in the show notes. But I think it's pretty fantastic. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here. I would just ask you, Carolyn, you know, when you're from your vantage point, you get to see the horizon that many don't, right? Because we're in the weeds or we're solving problems for one company at a time, and you've got thousands of companies you're helping at a time. So if you were to put yourselves in the shoes of some of these security leaders, what would be some of the insights into their potential pain points that they may be? Where are the pain points you see arriving over and over and over again? And what are some of the insights you could leave the audience with today that, you know, if they're that security leader, high growth software company, it's ship as fast as you can. How do we do better as a team?
Yeah. Far and away, the most common complaint that I hear about when I meet with security leaders is around hiring. Caroline, I've got open application security roles on my team. Can you help me find some people? And this is just everyone, you know, everyone, it seems, is in a position where, you know, their top person just left last month, you know, and they've got 2 more recs to fill on top of that. And they're having a really challenging time with it. I think that the security industry on both sides, which is to say on the hiring manager side, as well as on the candidate side, this is a problem that we have not solved. Some security hiring managers do not do an amazing job at writing job descriptions. And I understand why. Sometimes it is difficult to kind of like boil down a person's work in a page or two. But I think that that's something that I think security hiring managers can get better at writing more precise job descriptions that actually break things down beyond, I want a person who's done AppSec for 5 years. Great. There's like a limited number of people in the world who would meet that qualification. But what's that person going to do? What type of problems is this person going to solve? What sorts of activities is this person going to be performing day to day? You know, I think that to the extent that a hiring manager can break down a job description to a granular level, it's actually going to it's actually going to make the matching process easier. I also think that on the candidate side, I don't know. I'm going to go ahead and just place a lot of the blame on the hiring managers. It's a really hard thing to do. It's a really hard thing to do. The other, I think, mistake that I see is I see security leaders who, for all sorts of reasons, are super busy and don't consider recruiting to be a top priority because they've got all sorts of other stuff going on. And I totally get that. At the same time, you know, in larger organizations, some security hiring managers have the benefit of working with recruiters, and a lot of recruiters also kind of like don't know how to do this. And so my advice therefore is actually for hiring managers to get super engaged with the process. I think it's really important that the hiring manager is the first person looking at the resume, looking at the profile, and not necessarily a recruiter. I think that unfortunately right now, you know, and this isn't a recruiter's fault either, unless you're like a cybersecurity recruiter and that's what you do, in which case I think the expectations are higher. But for like a general technology recruiter, you know, I think folks may default to, does this person have an OSCP? Just because a person does or does not have an OSCP does not necessarily mean that they are not an excellent AppSec pen tester. And so these things, you know, it's hard to do. But my advice for hiring managers is to get granular and specific when it comes to your job descriptions. Try not to rely on recruiters, because the pattern matching that recruiters are often really good at will, I think, prevent some great candidates potentially from coming your way. And I really encourage hiring managers to get very involved in the process and actually go so far as to source candidates personally yourself. Because it's a super hard thing to do. Everyone who's got good skills, that's not totally fair. It is a weird time. It's a weird year.
Yes,
a lot of folks with a lot of great skills already have good paying jobs. And that makes it a really difficult job for a hiring manager to try and find someone who's great at something like AppSec and then get them to leave their current role and come over to yours. That's a hard thing to do.
It is. And I think that is a great place to kind of focus on the conversation, because that's the path forward. It always comes back to people. We can talk about the technology, we can make better process, but we got to have great people as well. And there's no greater way of building a team than, like, in a perfect world, you just hire from your own network of people that you've connected with, you've trusted, you've built relationships over time with. When you can't do that, get great security recruiters. I would actually go as far as say, don't use general technology recruiters. Like I don't. I've only had very specific security recruiters, because they can speak the language and they understand when I'm rambling for 2 minutes, oh, actually, Connor, what you want is someone who can do this, right? And to your point about being granular and specific, there's a really big difference in filling an AppSec role. If you need someone to manage the vulnerability management process and someone to do pen testing for you, or someone to pen test in Ruby, or someone to like go after your Java application, these are different skill sets and these are different expertise. And that's where getting granular and specific, because you're right, just filtering on OSCP is not good enough, you know, or we're going to get what we get for it, right? If we say that's our criteria, that's what we get back. So, well, Carolyn, you've been so generous for your time. Thank you so much for this. There's a bunch of notes and a bunch of homework I have now, so thank you. I will, if people want to reach out, they want to connect with you, they want to learn more, they want to stay in touch, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yep. Folks can find me on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter a little bit, but LinkedIn is really the place. I also welcome any messages around any of these topics. My email is caroline@cobalt.io.
Perfect. And we will make sure that's ready for everybody in the show notes. You've been, like I said, incredibly generous. You've got a book you've worked on, you've got content you're putting on LinkedIn. You're one of the top trainers there. You already have your own podcast that you're working on. So it's just, thank you again, and continue, please, to say the great things and champion the great messages that you're doing in the industry today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.